Hi guys, Dino here. It's finally time to talk about the music in Fear Hunger OST Termina, an indie horror game that's recently exploded in popularity, and rightfully so. Before we begin, however, a short but important disclaimer. The game we'll be covering in this video is for adult audiences only. It contains depictions of extreme violence, gore, sexual violence, and many other similarly grotesque things. I will not include any of these depictions in this video, nor will I describe any of them or make any specific references. Just know that if you choose to play this game or watch other videos about it, you will see some of this stuff. If you're sensible to any of these topics, watching this video will be fine. Just be cautious with content around this game in general. Additionally, I will spoil some of this game and its different endings, as well as some stuff from the first Hunger game, since some of the songs only appear under very specific circumstances. Alright, let's talk about Termina. Termina is the sequel to the original Fear and Hunger game from 2018, whose OSTs we covered extensively in the previous video. If you haven't seen it yet, you might want to check it out, since I will be making some comparisons between the soundtracks. Termina released in December of 2022, but is technically still in development. The game, as well as its entire soundtrack, have been created by one single individual, Miro Haverinen, aka Orange. The sequel closely follows the formula of the first game. A survival horror game with RPG elements, albeit the RPG elements are significantly more noticeable in Termina. No kidding, one of the characters can beat a lot of the encounters simply by talking to them. Pretty cool if you ask me. While Termina is set in the same universe, the events occur centuries after our former protagonist's unfortunate descent into unfathomable horror. This time you play as one of 14, currently 8 playable contestants in a battle royale slaughterfest brought upon the not-so-innocent inhabitants of Prehevil by a divine being known as the trickster moon god. The reference is very on the nose, isn't it? The game is full of these, so strap yourself in. You're tasked with a simple mission. Eliminate the other participants and go to the ominous tower in the new side of town. This creates a stark contrast to the first Hunger game, as the experience is no longer just about overcoming otherworldly obstacles and surviving in a brutal environment. Now you must also fight your way through a series of surprisingly charismatic individuals with uniquely challenging abilities and depressing backstories. Well, some more than others, I suppose. Both gameplay and story have been carefully woven into a terrifying yet surprisingly pleasant experience that offers a different taste to the original while retaining many of its engaging qualities. But what about the music? Does it hold up to the first game, or dare I say, surpass it? The answer to this question is ultimately subjective, but by the end I will provide one regardless. Let's take a listen. Monologue with the Moon is not actually in the game, but rather the background music of the release trailer. The trailer gives us a few glimpses of what awaits us in Prehevil, and the soundtrack immediately strikes me as weird in a way. Apart from the drum groove, the other elements all sound blurry, like they're covered in a thick layer of mist. Just like the whole game. Very nice. The melody lines are slow, have a sharp, aggressive timbre, and are laid with tremolo effects, resulting in a weirdly anxious yet familiar atmosphere. When I listen to this song with my eyes closed, I imagine being one of the many contestants in the game, having miraculously survived the tournament and being on my way out of this god-forsaken place with the same train that brought me here 3 days ago. Staring out the window, I look back at this small town and relive all the horrifying experiences I had to endure, praying these memories would leave me alone in many sleepless nights to come. As the track fades out with a few remaining tremolo notes, the train passes over a mountain, Prehevil disappearing behind the horizon, never to be seen again. I like this image, even though the game usually ends slightly differently. The track does a great job of providing the right atmosphere for the trailer. If Monologue with the Moon is anything to go by, Termina might have an overall different approach to its music than the first game, which met us with a short but harsh wake-up call upon entering the game. It is just the trailer music though, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. If you didn't watch the trailer and just booted up the game, like I have, unknowing what awaits you here, Dark Outside is likely the first thing you hear as it plays in the main menu. The sounds at the very beginning can be interpreted in many ways. I can imagine them as screaming in the far distance, perhaps a lumber mill deep in the thick forest sawing through pieces of wood or other organic matter. But maybe it's something different, something otherworldly. Shortly after, we are met with what I believe to be a bass guitar, playing a nice little repeating riff, equally clouded by the tremolo effect. The riff itself can be described as mysterious. It feels like stepping out of the train and setting foot in Prehevil for the very first time, immediately struck by its peculiar ambience. It doesn't sound harsh or depressing, but somehow still eerie. Like exploring an abandoned house or an unmapped cave. A place that certainly fills your mind with fear, yet somehow appears exciting enough to ignore all warnings. You know of the dangers, or at least you think you know, but you enter anyway. I love the sections between these riffs, where we just get a few long notes, leaving a lot of time to become anxious, irritated, until the next repetition of the riff makes you curious again. It's a nice back and forth, and a nice callback to the first game's main menu theme, which was similarly subtle, although a bit more depressing. The more I listened to Dark Outside, and I did a lot since I died many times during my playthrough, the more I enjoy it, the more I understand it, or at least I think I do. Fantastic. Memories is a fitting title, as the next piece is heard when we ride the train at the start of the game, reminiscing about our past life and the choices we made up to this point, some in a nostalgic, others in a more regretful manner. Memories is very minimalist, featuring only a dreamy piano smothered in a thick and wet delay effect, accompanied by the soothing sounds of the railway tracks. Delightful. The musical approach reminds me of early 20th century Impressionist music, particularly piano works of French composers like Claude Debussy, Eric Satie, and some of their colleagues. One of the defining characteristics of this genre is the blurriness both in the musical ideas and the instruments delivering them, which was mainly inspired by Impressionist paintings. Memories feels like a nod to this conceptual approach, while also creating a strong noir vibe you would recognize from many other movies and games. You could probably also sample it to make a lo-fi hip-hop beat to chill and study to. Very nice. We are only 3 tracks deep, so not even a tenth of what awaits us, but I already feel obliged to note how remarkably diverse Termina's OST appears to be. This can of course change throughout the remaining tracks, but if this trend continues, it could mean a rich variety of different musical ideas that would create a stark contrast to the more ambient and somewhat streamlined experience of Fear Hunger 1. Let's see how this develops. The save room theme accompanies your stay in the train after the rather confusing intro sequence. The keyboard offers a soft, calming timbre paired with slow musical ideas that let you find a moment of peace and tranquility, not realizing how much you will thirst for this feeling in the days to come. This tune is nothing spectacular, but it serves its purpose well. Whenever it comes on, my mind can rest, even if just for a brief moment. You can always return to the train if you need to save the game, and to my knowledge there will never be threats awaiting you there. However, do not be fooled by the soothing keyboard sounds. This is still very much a Fear and Hunger game. Saving always comes at a price. Autumnal Forest plays in the Maiden Forest. A number of events can occur in this place, some less pleasant than others. There are quite a few routes to explore here, so you always leave the forest asking yourself if you truly uncovered all of its secrets. The music reflects that nicely, as it is very reserved. There are a number of different elements at play, a very low yet dominating staccato bass riff, some electronic notes that fade in and out. At some points, if you listen closely, you can hear a violin play some very high flageolet notes, at times sounding like the bow is desperately scratching the strings until finally a note is heard. This wooden instrument suits the forest well and adds to the eerie feeling of this place. Autumnal Forest is more in line with the first Fear and Hunger, so it also offers some form of continuity in the franchise's musical approach. Not one of my favorites though. If you leave the train to the east, you'll find yourself at the riverside. The howling winds, occasional rumbling, and static noises seem very appropriate for this setting. The water is murky, the mist is thick. Occasionally you can hear a few notes from a string instrument, perhaps a guitar, perhaps something else. Almost like someone or something is calling you to advance, to explore further, while the otherwise suffocating lack of sound keeps you alert. Near the end, a stronger pulse along with more static can be heard, as if something colossal and otherworldly is slowly making its way towards you. If you stayed longer, who knows what abomination you could have encountered, but for one reason or another, you decide to leave. While Calm Before is similarly reserved as the previous track, I feel significantly more immersed when I listen to this one. It strikes the right balance between brief musical bits and tense silence. I like it. Just as you thought you were allowed to close your exhausted eyes and escape the unspeakable horrors of Prehevil for a brief moment, the moon god Rare appears in your dreams, or rather one of his underlings. The soft, bubbly keyboard is yet again at the forefront of ambience creation, however this time in a more unsettling fashion. Some of the low notes around the middle sound like a cello or even a double bass joining in to cause further distress. It sounds like the few notes from the outro of Dark Outside, so maybe it's meant to be a little callback to the main menu music. I enjoy Green Hue Moon a lot, and to my surprise, I had not paid much attention to this track while playing the game, since I was way more focused on the dialogue with Pleakley over here, as well as the respectably sized skill tree you can only access from this menu. When you give it a proper listen, it might surprise you. Great track. The titles of these tunes are well selected, as Under Your Feet plays if you end up in one of the various tunnel locations in the game. This track is mostly void of any traditional musical elements, barring some very quiet percussion and some ominous object clanging on pipes. Again, this reminds me of the first game's OST. Very nice. After a while, a radio can be heard, along with some static noise to go along. The radio introduces small melodic chunks, although they're not long enough to properly decipher them. While there is not much music to talk about here, I like the overall sound design, especially the sound of metal gates opening and closing at the start and end of Under Your Feet. This could be your character entering and exiting the tunnels, or it could be someone else opening one of its many entrances somewhere in the far distance of this putrid underground maze. Perhaps you should stay alert, just in case. There are certain points in the game that allow you to peek into the realm of an old god and feel the disconcerting forces of Rare up close. But beware, if you stay too long, you're gonna lose your mind. Closing Madness describes that perfectly, with the quiet clock ticking in the background, the low rumbling, increasingly faster drumming towards the end, the static noise to close it off. That weird reappearing sound effect sounds like the string instrument from before, but just played backwards. I'd be curious to know if that's the right guess. If you got an idea what this could actually be, tell me in the comments. While this doesn't feel like a standalone piece of music intended for isolated listening, the impression it creates fits the in-game context perfectly. You can literally hear any last remains of sanity leave your wretched body by every measure of this track. Incredible. All work, no play comes on during your stay in the previously mentioned dimension, however only in a specific part of it. Contrary to Closing Madness, all work, no play doesn't feel like it's hustling you. It stays slow with a steady pulse moving things forward, at least in some sections. We have a lot of different sounds that chime in, only to disappear a few moments later, making everything sound surreal and nightmarish. Although it doesn't necessarily strike me as evil, it feels ominous in a very neutral way. Some of the sounds are very reminiscent of animal sounds, especially birds. It's almost like you wander off your safe hiking path, and upon turning around, you realize that you are lost. Weeks go by, fatigue and hunger are getting a hold of you, and soon paranoia will get the rest of it. Was that noise really just chirping? Or was it someone else screaming in the far, far distant? Yeah, this track definitely sounds like losing your mind. It just takes a few minutes longer and is less obvious about it. Well done. You will hear this tune the first time you set foot into the old town. The sight of barely intact wooden shacks, decomposing bodies, and seemingly lifeless, equally decayed figures will make you reconsider your way forward. The music greets you with the sound of a fly, so another callback to the first game's soundtrack. Lovely. Slowly, instruments fade in one after another, creating a constant layer of mystery. At some points, some sort of moaning can be heard, although it could also be something else. We'll never know. During my playthrough of Termina, I had noticed that the music up to a certain point really didn't catch my attention all that much. Old Town Tourist is, sadly, an appropriate example. This can certainly be viewed positively, as it means that the music blends well into the rest of the game without distracting the player too much. On the other hand, it does feel boring when you listen to it as standalone music, so make of that what you will. Old Town Horror doesn't differ all too much from the previous track. It plays in the remaining parts of the old town, so it's bound to have a similar sound design. There's nothing particularly interesting I'd like to talk about here, so we'll just move on to the next one. If this one is your favorite, I'm sorry, but what should I do? And with that, we arrive at the fighting music. Breath of the Moon is a fitting name, as most of the encounters in the game are a direct result of the moon god's influence on Prehevil's inhabitants. I like the slow tempo and the constant high beeping. It clarifies instantly that your life is on the line every time you hear it. The static noise underneath fits well with the overall atmosphere and reminds me of the radio sounds we've been hearing up until this point. This is the background music for regular encounters, and I think it perfectly encompasses the danger of these situations and leaves the more aggressive sounds for encounters of the not-so-regular kind. In the end, a heartbeat becomes increasingly louder, and in the last seconds of the piece, the static and radio sounds disappear with the radio shutting off as the echo of Breath of the Moon vanishes into nothingness. Very atmospheric. In battle against most unique enemies is when you will hear Desperation. When exactly that will happen for the first time depends entirely on your choices. The path you take, the words you speak, the secrets you uncover. As much as I enjoy the percussion carrying this piece, the irritating, overmodulating synth, and the penetrating bass sound, Desperation is not one of my favorite tunes. It is thrilling, it evokes some sense of panic, it is a clear increase in tension, but for some reason it doesn't really convince me as much as some of the other tracks. I cannot exactly discern why. Perhaps it just lacks something crazy that matches the utterly ridiculous designs of enemies that will force this soundtrack to play. Perhaps something like Pulse and Anxiety from the first game. Now, Alone Prehevil informs you of yet unexplored terror right as you hear the first few seconds of the track. It plays in a section of the new town, a place that is not necessarily accessible from the start, so you have to earn your way towards this. The theme of static noises and radio-like sound bits is continued here, which I do enjoy. It gives the whole OST continuity that is not needed, but definitely appreciated. The game also features physical radios as interactive items in many places too, so that's another bonus. The overall atmosphere is surprisingly relaxed, and the steady groove of the drums goes well with the slow and mysterious chords above. There's a sense of depressive dread to this that perfectly fits my image of our contestants roaming around these sinister alleyways, trying to make sense of their situation and always watching their back for unexpected figures to appear out of the shadows. I do like the drum interludes between sections, albeit they are a tad bit too long for my liking. They're supposed to build up the tension towards a more dense and energetic part, but due to the length, it only works out semi-decently. Still, a very atmospheric track that doesn't rely too much on sound effect samples and delivers a sound that is pleasant even outside of the game's context. Very nice. We are welcomed with a warm bass sound playing a very cozy riff. Not what I'd expect from a track called Ashes of War, but I gladly take it, it sounds amazing. Shortly after, we get hit in the face with a completely different sound. This beat goes hard, maybe even a little too much. It's very percussive, there's not much happening besides drum and bass, but maybe it's this somewhat empty sound that makes this feel so threatening. I get the image of our protagonist returning to this city, once prosperous and lively, now war-torn and largely abandoned, and feeling tragically nostalgic about it, thinking back about their past lives, the peace, the quiet, the safety. All of a sudden, one of the many detestable creatures of this place turns around the corner, marching straight towards them. They are instantly taken out of their nostalgic daydream, as they once more have to ignore all else and desperately fight for their lives. While I don't enjoy the main portion of the track so much, I love the intro and I like the image I get from it. Termina has you traverse the empty streets of Prehevil during different daytimes. Time passes as you save the game, cycling through daytime, dusk, and night. Naturally, it is only at night where certain creatures step out of the darkness. Night is scary, but very held back. At times, the only thing you can hear for many seconds is just one low note ringing away. There are a few surprising moments though. Around the 2-minute mark, there is a brief interception of a choir singing an awfully depressing melody, instantly grabbing my attention. The static noises which introduce the singing also add to the overall scary vibe of the track. Sadly, the singing disappears shortly after, and it disappears for good. Afterwards, the mood changes to something more relaxing and ambient. A few more minutes of a very reserved soundscape pass, as we come to a somewhat familiar end. The last minute or so is played in reverse, sounding extremely similar to one of my favorite tracks from the first game, Mahab Streets. It's not the same sample though, and I can't quite pinpoint what is being played in reverse here. Regardless, the feeling I get from it is insanely nostalgic. I imagine myself lying somewhere in the streets of Prehevil, bleeding out after one of the many unforgiving monstrosities annihilated me in combat. I look back on my life, the choices I made, and wonder if it could have turned out differently had I not come to this place, had I chosen differently. This fantasy allows me to escape my excruciating reality for a brief moment until my body finally gives in and I leave this world at peace. Deep green is audible in the deep woods. Shocking. A few ways exist to enter this location, and though it might seem inconspicuous at first, there are secrets waiting to be uncovered. After the initial, unusually long build-up, we get some kind of pulse that sounds very electric, like the sounds of a generator or something similar. There is a repeating melody lurking just behind that pulse, and it lends the track its mysterious vibe. However, the guitars throw me off completely. I don't know, the way they are played with such a heavy vibrato, it just sounds like it belongs on a SpongeBob soundtrack, not in Fear and Hunger. Maybe this is intentional, as you can encounter certain characters in the deep woods who are most certainly not supposed to be there, but musically, it doesn't really fit in my opinion. After about 1.5 minutes, you can hear a strange noise that I can't quite decipher. Is it steam coming from a valve, perhaps connected to the complex underground tunnel system? Is it some strange abomination breathing furiously as they prepare to attack you? I don't know. But maybe you do. What the hell is this sound? I remember entering the shopping district for the first time. I was surprised how cozy the music felt, even with these bird-like sounds occasionally piercing through this tranquilizing atmosphere. The kick drum is remarkably soft here, which is crucial in maintaining this vibe. After 2/3 of the track, Remaining Routine leaves with just one synth sound ringing away, eventually fading into obscurity. This tune does not reflect the various horrors of the shopping district, but it doesn't need to. There's an abundance of tracks that deliver the terrifying, anxiety-inducing bits, but a good OST offers balance and diversity. Contrasting elements are important to let the listener breathe, to allow rest from emotionally exhausting sounds, so you can get back out there ready again to become terrified. Remaining Routine achieves that beautifully. Originally, I wanted to finish Termina's OST in one single video, but due to the number of tracks we need to talk about, that just didn't seem feasible. I wanted to get this video out before 2024, so I'm glad I was able to deliver. I'm already working on part 2 and it will be the next upload on this channel, so you won't have to wait long. Since the OST spans 38 tracks, I thought about splitting it in half with 19 tracks each, but then I saw that number 20 on the list is Lost Haven or Shillings, and I just needed to cover this immediately. By the way, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for part 2 and more OST reviews in the future. Also, what's your favorite soundtrack from Termina? Make sure to tell me in the comments. Lost Haven / Shillings is somewhat reminiscent of the 2 extra tracks from the first Fear Hunger game. Reminiscent in the sense that it really doesn't fit with the rest of the soundtrack and goes for a more easygoing, jazzy vibe. There are some major differences though. You might remember that I criticized the extra tracks for sounding a bit off in certain regards, like the rhythmical tightness and the phrasing in some parts. I'm glad to say that I never got this feeling with Lost Haven. This little tune is perfectly tailored to its in-game location, the Prehevil Bob Club. This is a music club that seems abandoned, but offers our protagonists an opportunity to disappear from the overworld and take a proper rest from the insanity-inducing reality of life. It is at this point that you realize every single contestant in this godforsaken Battle Royale tournament is a human being with goals, dreams, and memories from a life before all of this. Musically, the double track is supposed to give off a jazzy vibe, and it does that decently. The instrumentation in particular, with the old piano sound, the double bass and wind instruments aid greatly in this. It fits beautifully with the aesthetics of the Prehevil Bob Club and also with the relaxing atmosphere of the soundtrack. I don't want to analyze this tune too much. Both parts are well written and very similar, even though the second part picks up the pace a bit, offering a nice contrast. There are no musical hiccups that would take me out of listening to them. I can just sit back and enjoy. Fantastic. Give this one a proper listen sometime. I'm sure you're gonna like it. And with that, we're done. For now. I will make a longer conclusion at the end of part 2, but I'd like to share my overall thoughts about Termina's music so far. I enjoyed more than the first game's OST. This is not to say that I didn't like the first one, but there I feel like we had a higher number of pieces that were relying a lot on long periods of silence and sound effects instead of tangible musical ideas. There were a few amazing outliers, and the whole OST definitely matched the game's atmosphere, but I find myself liking Termina's pieces a tad bit more so far. Also, there is more variety in Termina's music. You still have your reserved pieces that maintain this eerie tension for long periods of time, while never taking your attention away from the actual game. You also got the battle tracks that ramp things up a bit, convincing you that the stakes are indeed brutally high. But we're only halfway in, and between the Dark Outside, Lost Haven, and Remaining Routine, there is already so much variety packed in this OST. I really enjoy that in a game's musical concept. Great job so far, Miro. That's all for today, folks. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for part 2. If you have recommendations for future OST reviews, feel free to recommend them in the comments. I read every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.